So I picked up Detroit Become Human the other day, and it was really okay. Detroit is a story-based adventure game where most of the gameplay is made up of dialogue choices and plot elements rather than being a shooter action game. It's set in 2038 Detroit, where human-like androids have been created to act as personal servants to their owners. Most of them work fine, but some of them have some sort of virus that causes them to deviate from the norm and gain a sort of sentience, which is the main focus of the game. Detroit was created by Quantic Dream and directed by David Cage, the creators behind Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls, which has similar gameplay elements. Learning from their previous experience, did they create a compelling title with Detroit? Let's discuss. For a game that's plot-centric instead of gameplay-centric, one of the most important parts is the world that they create the game in. The setting is what ties in all the story elements and characters into one cohesive experience, and in order for it to do that, it needs to be detailed and make sense. From an art perspective, Detroit is a wonderful world. The city center has a futuristic vibe to it, and even though it might be too forward-focused for being set only 20 years from today, the present is an equal distance to 1998, and the world honestly doesn't look that different. Still, I think it's within an acceptable range, and it's not too crazy, and the level of detail they put into set pieces is really well done. Even when contrasting with the poorer parts of the city, they managed to mesh the two extremes together so that it not only works but paints a picture of the income disparity that exists between the residents. However, the events and general lore of the world just really don't make sense. If you turn on any of the TVs, they state that the unemployment rate is up to 35%, which is quite high. Actually, it's higher than the unemployment rate of the Great Depression, which was only 29%, and saw people losing their homes and dying of starvation. Yet, if you look around, there's a large number of people that can somehow manage to afford housekeeping robots that have prices of upward of $5,000 to $8,000. As we'll see later on, a literal meth head is able to afford 2 of them. It seems that if over a third of the population wasn't working, there would be more people opting to do just the dishes themselves, since an android would be way too expensive to even be practical. For a country that seems so depressed, the way people act in the game just really doesn't add up with the setting. Then you have to look at how Detroit displays its political conflicts and general social trends. A lot of people are upset over the existence of androids because they took almost everyone's jobs. To create a compelling world, there should be a lot more showing than telling. The conflicts of the world should be understood from being in the world and slowly putting pieces together so that's something that you experience more than have it explained to you. Does Detroit do that? No, it beats you over the head with its central message of people don't like androids, but androids are actually okay. Within the first few minutes of one of the storylines, you have a street preacher call you a demon and a group of protesters beat you up. For a theme that parallels real-world discrimination and offers a unique perspective to view real-world issues, it would have been nice to see it handled with a little bit more nuance, and trust me, the heavy-handedness doesn't get that much better in the writing. So since all the storylines start in separate spots and act mostly independent from each other, I'm going to cover them one at a time up until they meet, starting with my favorite one, Connor. Fair warning, most of the rest of this video is filled with spoilers, so if you don't like that, skip to here. Connor's storyline interests me so much because it's honestly the best one in the game. Connor is a prototype android created by CyberLife to work as a detective. In the opening sequence, you can see that he's able to piece together information about suspects, recreate events, and use info to negotiate with criminals, which is pretty cool. Even though the detective work is a little bit more hand-holdy than the Arkham games, it still leaves room for you to miss things, and it's also really fun. It's a way of exploring the idea of collectibles and secrets, but using them to actually affect the outcome of the story. Some of the details unlock different dialogue choices and actions, so it pays off to look around. After the first experience with the Deviant, Connor's teamed up with Lieutenant Hank Anderson, an alcoholic with a distaste for androids, but a great detective. The police force puts you on all the Deviant cases, with CyberLife's owner, Amanda, paying special interest in your investigations. Really, you're trying to find deviants to piece together how deviancy was created and how it spread so CyberLife can stop it before it bankrupts their company. Over time, your actions let you slowly become friends with Hank, who turns out to have a hatred for androids because his son was in a car crash and killed by the medical robot that treated him because the surgeon was too high on red ice to operate. If you follow the correct storyline, and I'll explain later why I think there is a correct storyline, you battle with your own software instability. Most of it comes to a head when you meet Kamsky, the original founder of CyberLife, when you go to question him about deviance. He puts a gun in your hand and he tells you that he'll tell you everything he knows about it if you kill his android, which tests your morality, and as you have to choose between saving a life or furthering your investigation, which is your primary objective up until this point. For some reason, making that choice doesn't immediately make you deviant, and that choice is conveniently held off until you do the exact same again, but for a dramatic effect. The reason why I like Connor's storyline is because it's the only well-written one in the game. I liked watching Connor slowly slip into deviance because it was fitting for him to do so, as he was previously the big famous deviant hunter that androids feared. Plus, that initial role leads to real conflict within them that explored pretty well over his storyline. Also, watching him slowly warm up Hank, who normally hates androids, to the point that they become being friends is rewarding. Hank is a really interesting character as well because there's depth to him. He has a sense of humor.
Sulu! Attack! Good job.
A troubled past, vices, and characteristics that make him feel human in a game where it's honestly hard to tell between the androids and the people around them. If the whole game was played through the perspective of these two, I'd consider it to be very well written, but unfortunately there's 2 other ones we have to look at. Kara is the housekeeping robot owned by an abusive meth head named Hod. Todd was a taxi driver that lost his job to self-driving cars, and then he lost all of his other jobs to androids. His wife and daughter left him once he stopped paying his bills and slept into a red ice habit. Now he lives in a dumpy house with Alice and Kara. Apparently Kara was previously broken by Todd when he went on one of his tirades, and he got a replacement, which begs the question, how does anybody in this world afford androids? The first scene shows that androids cost thousands of dollars, yet this unemployed dude with obvious delinquencies on his credit shown by his past due bills can somehow manage to buy a child android, a housekeeping one to take care of it, and a replacement for her if she's not covered by warranty. I mean, he obviously doesn't have the money to buy him outright, so who's willing to finance him? After he goes on another tirade, you're forced to disobey Todd in order to save Alice from being killed, which makes you a deviant. You have the choice to either kill him in the escape or just run, and you head off to start a new life for yourself and Alice. You have to find a place to stay for the night, and the next day you cross paths with Connor, who, if he finds you, chases you for a while. You eventually find your way to a man named Zlatko, who at first seems to be somebody that works to help deviant androids escape. However, he takes you to his basement and explains that he's actually just taking androids in to either resell, experiment on, and tries to wipe your memory. After escaping the machine, finding Alice, and possibly escaping with an android named Luther, he tells you about someone who will help you across the Canadian border where there are no android laws. Rose. Your group sets out to find Rose and gets trapped in an amusement park along the way, but eventually makes it to her house, and she sets you up to head for the border. Then you have Markus. Markus belongs to Carl Manfred, a wheelchair-bound artist that's a generally cool dude. He helped you tap into your creative side through painting, and everything comes to a head after his meth head son tries to steal his paintings to sell. You have the choice to either let his son Leo die or him, but either choice kills you. You come back from the dead, find a safe house on a ship named Jericho. There you team up with people to steal from a CyberLife warehouse for spare parts, and then you take over a news station to broadcast a message, which basically starts an android revolution. You do a couple demonstrations, and eventually you can get the public to take your side or start a violent revolution. The reason I don't get into much detail on these two storylines is they pretty much lack any detail to go into. Kara is a pretty one-dimensional character, with her sole identity being based around getting out of the States. She becomes deviant almost immediately, and the only personal growth that you see from her is her becoming a mother to Alice, which was pretty much established from the start. The only conflict that surrounds her is the obstacles that stand between her and Canada, and most of them are pretty tame. Don't get me wrong, there's a couple intense moments in her storyline, and some of the bonding between her and Alice is pretty emotional, but her entire story lacked enough substance to keep it entertaining. On top of that, Alice and Luther honestly don't do anything for me. Alice rarely talks and is only around to motivate Kara to keep going, and while I'm glad she didn't become the cliche child character that constantly causes issues for the main character, I just wish she was more than a prop. The only major thing that comes out of her character is the fact that she turns out to be an android, which is honestly a pretty dumb twist. The androids can communicate with each other without speaking to each other, yet Alice somehow never showed any indication that she could do that as well. Like, was her Bluetooth turned off this whole time? There's not some other way besides the LED in our heads that androids can tell themselves apart from human? Also, the girl that's used in the reveal has a light on her head, so where's Alice's? She came with one, so who took it out? Also, sometimes you see androids that look like Kara, but somehow in the midst of running through town and seeing hundreds of androids, she never went, hey, that girl kind of looks like my daughter. Plus, even though he tried to say something about it like 3 or 4 times, Luther couldn't tell Kara that she was an android. Like when they were looking for a warm place to stay because of her, Luther couldn't just go, no, let's walk because she's an android. The entire reveal around Alice isn't impossible, but it just takes too many coincidences for it to be believable. Also, Luther barely exists in the grand scheme of things and ends up being a prop just like Alice. He just kind of follows you around and helps you every now and then, but you never really learn that much about him. Really, her whole storyline does absolutely nothing to the world. She eventually meets up with Markus, who helps her leave the country, but she doesn't do anything integral to the central story like Connor or Markus. Really, she's more dependent on the world instead of the other way around. Marcus's decisions play a part in her escape, but she can even act independently outside of that. If you remove her from the game completely, she wouldn't change anything major at all. Honestly, out of all the storylines, I feel like hers dragged on the most. Markus is honestly just kind of annoying. He walks into a safe haven for androids and almost immediately appoints himself leader. If some random came up to my secret hideout, low-key roasted it, and was like, hey, let's go raid this guarded warehouse for parts, I would probably say no. In my game, I ended up getting somebody killed and all the secondary characters ended up hating me, but for some reason they still listen to me. That almost makes me ask, why do androids care so much about their morality? I mean, at the end of the day, they're just computers. It's not like they can actually die except for extreme circumstances. Connor has the ability to die like 8 times in his storyline, yet has the ability to be cloned and come back to life. Markus was basically dead, but after finding some spare parts, he was back to normal. Actually, in Connor's investigation, he literally brings a dead android back to life just fine. The androids all have some sort of non-volatile memory, so it seems like it would be easy just to let them shut down if they're too far gone, then bring them back to life when they have the tools to do so. Anyway, I don't know. Some of the characters were outright hostile after I killed their friend, but when I was like, hey, let's just go hack this news station and send a message, nobody really hesitated to go, as if me getting their friend killed somehow showed my skills as an excellent leader. This game supposedly has some sort of friendship ranking between the characters, but it only really plays out in a handful of spots, like whether or not Hank saves you at CyberLife. For the rest of the game, it really doesn't affect affect anything at all because the people just kind of do what they're supposed to do in spite of it. Really, it's one of those circumstances where your free will controls everything except for when it becomes inconvenient for the plot. Like, there's no way for Jericho to hate Markus and still have him be their leader, so they will just forget hating him so they can have that outcome. Also, if you go the pacifist route, Markus stops becoming a leader at some point and literally becomes Robo-Jesus. Like, everyone immediately does whatever he says or does, and everyone starts worshiping him without question. Somewhere along the way, he figured out how to bypass the whole emotional shock element that you normally have to go through to become a deviant, and he starts instantly freeing people and start being all metaphoric and inspirational. I liked him being a leader and starting a movement, but at some point, Detroit kind of passed into preachy territory, which the world struggled with in the first place. He's also very one-dimensional in the sense that he instantly becomes a deviant, and there's really no progression into him becoming a leader because he just immediately kind of assumes that role. Also, supporting characters are probably the most forgettable people in the world. North is the only one I actually remember because she was kind of forced in the spotlight for some reason. As for the rest of them, I really can't remember any of their names or even how many of them there were. They spent so little time actually developing them into anything beyond monoliths representing a white and black decision that you have to make during a revolution. They lacked any sort of real personality or anything that makes them memorable about them. Really, if you hot swap them out in every cutscene, I probably wouldn't have noticed. So in terms of characters, Connor is really the only mildly interesting one. His entire arc shows him growing as a character and battling an internal struggle that ends up potentially affecting the story as a whole. His from shit with Hank is interesting and rewarding to complete. Really, his storyline is the only one that I enjoyed learning more about because he's such a dynamic and core part of Detroit. The rest of the characters I feel only detracts from the quality of Connor's writing. They feel extremely rushed and glossed over and rely on cliche events and twists to build him as character. Had they had the same attention and care put into him as Connor, Detroit probably would have been my favorite PS4 game so far, but the fact that 2/3 of the writing honestly kind of sucks, it really hurt my overall impression of the game. As for the entire concept of a branching story, I was honestly underwhelmed because even though there's a dozen or so possible endings, I feel like there's only one true ending, which defeats the entire purpose of a branching story. The game makes you want Kara, Alice, and Luther to make it to Canada. The game makes you want Connor to turn deviant. The game makes you want Markus to succeed. If any of those outcomes don't happen, it's not really an alternate ending, it's just a loss. Detroit sets up a world and characters that drive you to the endings and doesn't do anything to really support anything outside of that. There's no reason that it gives to make you want Kara, Markus, or Connor to fail. There's nothing ambiguous in the world that makes you desire anything else. If a stories that have multiple paths and endings, they need to mean something and have reasoning for them. If not, I don't really see why they exist except to mark off a checkbox for a branching story. I only explored one path for most of the chapters because the outcomes I got really didn't compel me to look for a different one. Like, there's very few spots where I desired for anything to go differently, and while it would be interesting to look at what else there is to offer, there's not really a strong reason to do so. Detroit has multiple endings that's akin to saying that 5 and 3 are alternate endings for the equation 2 + 2 = 4. Also, finally, there's the gameplay. One of the first things I noticed is that the camera is awful. I get that it moves the way it does for cinematic effect, but there's cases where it just really gets in the way. I spent the first couple of chapters completely disoriented because the way the camera pans and switches perspectives makes it super easy to get lost in a room while trying to look around. It makes you completely pass over things because some of the angles it chooses. Yeah, you can change the perspective by pressing a button and it gets easier as you play, but I feel like the camera should be the last thing you fight in the game. The camera was so bad in a part that it led me to being caught by security guards, which ended up throwing my game's progression off for a little bit. It did lead to a couple good looking sequences, but I don't think they were worth losing playability for. Also, the quick time events get annoying at times because they have this tendency to lack any sort of purpose. Like, I get having something to interact with objects and having things to press in combat, but do we really need to swipe back and forth 3 times the pain and panty? Do we really need to have combos when completing singular tasks? I would have preferred a lot of sequences as normal cutscenes, and I think there's times that they highlight the fact that the game is pretty much a walking and talking simulator and there's not that much actual gameplay. Overall, Detroit was honestly mediocre. It's a jumbled mess of really strong elements and really weak ones. The Connor storyline is exciting and engaging, but the other characters felt rushed and impersonal. They have their moments, but overall really don't provide anything that really hooks you into them. The path that they have set early on pretty much plays out exactly as you expect it to go, and any deviation from that course doesn't really provide any benefit or insight. Any ending except the happy ending for everyone lacks any reason why you'd want it. The world it creates is artistically appealing, but its politics and larger conflicts don't really make that much sense in relation to how they're depicted. Also, the central message is pretty blatant and one-dimensional, and Detroit likes to reinforce that by beating you over the head with it instead of exploring it. The gameplay is largely awkward and the camera is cumbersome, but at least you get some decent cinematography for your troubles. I know that the consensus of this game is going to be split between it being the best game and worst game ever, but I don't think either end has much of an argument. It has its good moments, and there's parts in it that show that the writers and developers put a lot of passion and effort into Detroit, but I don't think it's some sort of gaming masterpiece that has no flaws. On the other hand, I don't think the flaws that it has are inexcusable nor damning, but the large problems still exist. In all honesty, it's extremely mediocre or average. It's a PS4 exclusive that's worth picking up at some point, but honestly not really an exclusive to buy a PS4 to experience. Really, unless you have some super strong urge to play it for some reason, I'd honestly suggest waiting for it to go on sale before picking up. It's worth checking out, but not an unforgettable experience. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and give me a like. Sorry about the delay and the fact that it took forever for this video to come out. I had some life things to take care of, but everything should be good now. I have a Project Cars 2 review coming out here within the next couple days, and I want to try to review a TV show, which is something I haven't actually done on the channel before, but I thought it'd be interesting to give a little bit of a go. And I'm going to be going to Canada sometime at the beginning of next month, and I might record that. I'm not 100% sure. If it sounds interesting, leave me a comment below, and if any of that sounds interesting, subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you later. Peace.